Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the In the Clutch podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jonathan Michael, and a little bit of a small show tonight. We just have Gavin Russell along with me, but Gavin, look forward to talking some high school football with you. Where you're now in the quarterfinal round of the playoffs. It really at the point where only the strong survive, and there's four local teams that have made it to the quarterfinal round. And honestly, I think at this point, it's hard to really pick against any of them.
Yeah, no, it really is. And, unfortunately, I didn't get to head out to that Washington Cremoni game last week. But, I was definitely following along and a lot of other great games around the area. I know a lot of the local teams had to travel some distances. A few, unfortunately, their season came to an end. But it's been a great high school football season up to this point, and the teams that are left are trying to just keep it on being special. So excited to see what they can continue to accomplish here in the third week of the playoffs.
Certainly, we got Washington, Normal Community, Bloomington Central Catholic, and Olympia also alive. We'll preview all of their games coming up on later in the show. But Gavin, we didn't have a show last week. Just lots going on behind the scenes at Cliff Sports Media. Obviously, we got all sorts of other sports going on. We had obviously state cross country, state soccer last week. We have volleyball postseason. Congrats to the Morton Potters for making it to state, taking on Wheaton St. Francis, if I'm not mistaken, in the semifinals tomorrow in Class 3A. But yeah, lots going on. But football obviously I think still has the eyes of most people around and everything. And obviously, let's not do a show last week and everything. Weren't able to maybe talk as much about some other teams that made the playoffs that have been eliminated and everything. Some overall, just Gavin, some takeaways, maybe some surprising results that you have from any teams in the postseason up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, Metamora obviously is now out of it, but I was very corrected by the Redbirds, and I picked against them in our season pick them a couple times, and they proved me wrong. I picked them to win against Highland, but unfortunately they weren't able to get the job done. But it was close. The Redbirds showed put up a gritty fight. They beat a really good Decatur and MacArthur team that we were out covering. This is a team that I think has a lot coming back. They'll lose several players, key players that are seniors, but you bring back guys like Cranford, that can be spark plugs to your team. That's so huge, and that gives you just a jolt of optimism going forward. So I really think the Redbirds are back. I know they're now kind of jockeying for position with their basketball team. They were the football school and they're the basketball school, but honestly, they can be both because they've both proven to be really, really good teams. And I think the Redbirds can be back next year for sure. But unfortunate into their season, but they've definitely surprised me, and they came back and had a strong year in 2023.
For sure. That Redbirds basketball team ranked 16th in the nation. Preseason rankings by Max Preps. Obviously, you can, certainly say some things about preseason rankings. Obviously, them not meaning much, especially by Max Preps, who's, I think their ranking system, again, not to say that Metamora isn't deserving, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm very glad they're getting the recognition they deserve, and they're going to be extremely, extremely good this year. Probably a state favorite in Class 3A. But Max Preps rankings,
Sure.
they're never super accurate to begin with and everything. Maybe near the top, I think it's fairly accurate, but it's all algorithm based at that point. So eager to see if Metamora can live up to the expectations in hoops, but still focusing back on football again. I think Metamora had a really good season again. I think it was kind of like last year for them. They kind of came the season with some unknowns, like who their quarterback was going to be, who they had returning. Metamora is always a senior heavy team, and I looked at their roster before this season. I was like, well, I don't really, I wasn't really quite sure how good that team was going to be and everything. I knew Jadon Cranford was going to be really good. I didn't know he was going to be this good this year. The offensive line was great and everything. Nick Rhodes, really impressed me. And, the 1 year got to watch him at the varsity level as well. Really, some big guys on defense too. So, I mean, really, I think you talk about in terms of like all around teams, you look at like the strength of their offense and their defense. I think Metamora, honestly, I think may have been one of the strongest teams in the area in terms of just being an all around good team. Because, for example, again, obviously Washington is extremely good. They're still in the playoffs, but their defense is very good. Their offense is also very good as well. Cam McQuarrie. I mean, that's really all all you need to say. But for example, Washington doesn't really pass much. For example, now they've been able to make it work and everything. There's really a winning recipe that they have there. But I think when you look at the passing game, the running game, the pass defense, the run defense, the special teams as well. I think you put all those things together. I don't know if you think differently, Gavin, or maybe any other teams in mind. I think about it more. I think maybe alongside Normal Community might have been one of the best teams in the area in terms of that this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Normal Community, I think, is just because they're 7A school, and that takes nothing away from them. Of course, they've got to go play 7A competition, mostly from the Chicagoland area. So that's a different animal. But yeah, in terms all around team, the Ironmen and definitely the Redbirds, they're a very disciplined program. These guys from day one have great coaching and things like that. A lot of them will play through the JFL program and stuff, which not every community has as much. Guys may get into football a little bit later on once they get into high school. So props to Metamora, but I got to switch directions here because, I thought of a couple other things that definitely surprised me. How about Wilmington and Tri-Valley finally meeting up again? And Wilmington finally getting one out of that matchup. I know they've had some recent playoff matchups, and down go the Vikings. I know they're a little on the fringe of our coverage area, but down, I believe that's 2 or 3A, and Wilmington finally getting the better of them. That was a surprising one. And Farmington and Bloomington Central Catholic, Farmers went down in a pretty close battle. So hey, I mean, small school stuff's really heating up, John. I think that we might forget about it from time to time as we cover Washington, but we got to really keep our eye on the small schools.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It was crazy to me is that 2A bracket, especially the northern bracket, that BCC, Farmington, Knoxville, Tri Valley were in. By the time you got to the second round of the playoffs, the combined record of the 8 teams that were still alive in the northern part of the bracket was 76-4. I mean, there were all 8 teams that I think were state championship level teams. So obviously, if you got to feel bad for Farmington and Tri Valley, Knoxville, they all got knocked out of the 2A playoffs. I think you put those teams in any other class, I think they're getting at least to the quarterfinals, if not further. Farmington had a really good year. Tri Valley again, they were undefeated. So I was a little surprised to see them lose to Wilmington, especially 42-14. Wilmington just kind of ran away with that one, but just shows how competitive things are in Class 2A. Tri Valley had a pretty good year, all things considered. I don't know if their schedule was maybe as tough as it had been in years past and everything. I think they were the runaway favorite, and the Heart of Illinois Conference after a couple weeks of the season, and everything's kind of cruised on from there. And then you get Wilmington, who also they play maybe a bit more tougher competition, just slightly maybe than Tri Valley does. But Farmington, obviously they lost to Bloomington Central Catholic. That was an interesting game because it featured 2 area teams in our coverage area, and Colin Hayes led the Saints to victory again. If you don't know the name Colin Hayes, he's one you got to keep an eye on. A really great runner, great passer, had 3 touchdowns last week. And BCC, they got Maroa Forsyth this week. That's another just absolute staple once you get deeper into Class 2A playoffs.
Yeah, it is. And I've, for Bloomington Central Catholic fans, if you're out there, the only game I've been to for the Saints this year was their closest matchup of the season. Probably the one that gave the most heart palpitations to both players and fans alike when they played Prairie Central. But so far they've looked good in these playoffs, winning last week by a couple of touchdowns. And whenever you're winning comfortably in the first couple rounds, you got to be encouraged by that for sure. But Maroa Forsyth is undefeated this season. For just in sake of comparison against some other teams that you may know about, they beat Olympia at Olympia. Maybe a little out of our coverage area, but always a really good team, Williamsville, down towards the Springfield area. So they've had some big wins, and obviously two juggernauts are going to go at it. In small schools, you may not be able to talk as much about, what's the depth of the team, right? Because most guys are just naturally going to be playing both ways. You know, you have more of those versatile guys, but I think really what it comes down to is, you know, which team is going to be able to just make the big plays, you know, which team is going to be able to rip off for big chunks of yardage or a big touchdown. And, you know, it's going to be close. You know, I don't want to put a prediction on it out there. You know, you'll see him on our CSM Pick'em officially, but, you know, I think Bowling Central Catholic has a really good chance here to maybe pull something off. But like I said, it really could be a flip of a coin. It should be within a touchdown, no more than 2 touchdowns, but it's going to be close.
Yeah, it certainly will be. That's going to be really fun games. Saints obviously a very historic program. They've won lots of state championships, in their past. That was back when they were in Class 4A. Now they're down in Class 2A and everything. But here's why I think BCC can be dangerous in the playoffs. And obviously they've already shown this. But what I've seen in the playoffs is teams that run the ball very well are going to fare well in the playoffs. Obviously, like Washington, for example. Metamora, they almost got to the quarterfinals. They had a lead against Highland. They run the ball extremely well. Those are just 2 examples. There's obviously more teams.
Well, and you mentioned that, not to cut you off, but running the ball, you know, as I've noticed over the years, I always give the comparable to say like Peoria High, right? They like to pass the ball. You know, you don't see a lot of high school teams pass the ball as much as they do. But even in these later stages, like last year when they got to the state championship, they ran the ball a lot. You know, it's later in the season. You got guys that are tired. You're going up against stiff defenses. So when you can go with your, you know, tested and true running the ball, that's a big difference maker. And I just think, you know, kind of backing your point there, and as I interrupted, but the Saints do that very, very well, and as does Washington. And I think that's why you see these teams continuing to move on, among other reasons, but that's got to be one of the primary reasons for sure.
Certainly, you look at the other 2 teams that are still in the playoffs as well. Normal Community runs the ball really well. Tommy Davis and Kaylin Taylor. Olympia is also very good at running the ball as well. They have a number of guys. I know they have their quarterback is Zach Keedy, Nick Olson. They have a couple other guys whose names escape me at the moment, but Olympia is a really old school, just ground and pound team. They'll run the ball over 40, maybe even over 50 times a game. I know mobile quarterback certainly helps with that as well. So I think that's certainly the common theme. If you want to go for it in the playoffs, you got to run the ball, and we also saw that in the first round as well. I think one of the more surprising results, at least in my opinion, from the first round was Joliet Catholic beating Peoria High by a couple scores, and JCA they ran a real didn't really watch much of that game, but it looks like they were running a lot of this really old school wing T. I mean, just running it right at Peoria High. Obviously they like to run the ball. Malik Ross had a really great season. Unfortunately, that Floyd was cut short in the first round of the playoffs and couldn't see more from him. But JCA ran the ball really well. That's why they beat Peoria High. And then there's also another game I again escaping me right now. There's one other team I was going to mention that I got eliminated. Also you look at PND. PND is, I mean, you talk about a team that runs the ball. They were able to go on the road and beat number 3 seed Kiwani on the road, and then they lost to Harrisburg this past week, 27-22. They were leading that game up until the final minute of it. Harrisburg got a touchdown to win on their home field. So real tougher. PND, who I think. I honestly, after they won that first round game, I thought they were, I thought they had the chance to, really do something special. So, now we're kind of left with what could have been, but I think the Irish. I think a lot of encouraging signs from this year, especially after going 3-6 last year.
Yeah, for sure. And, as we'll kind of move on and look at some of our other games, we kind of got through the Bowling Central Catholic, but you mentioned Olympia there, which we think they're going to take on Roxana this coming Saturday. And the Shells, how about that? I
Indeed,
love
one
that
of
mascot.
one of the best mascots and just color logos too. Their logos
Yes.
almost look like the actual the Shell gas station logo,
Yes.
and they have a really cool colorway of red, yellow, and blue. You don't see that too often, and
Mhm.
I don't know why. I know maybe some people would think different. Maybe maybe my eyes are just different than some people's, but I think that red, yellow, and blue is a really cool colorway. And obviously Olympia, they got great uniforms as well. They got the Northern Carolina. They got the North Carolina Tar Heels,
Yeah.
kind of like the little tartan or not tartan, but whatever, like the plaid, whatever, you kind of know, like the
Yeah. Yeah.
right on the helmet, like the light blue and everything. I mean, that's an all time uniform matchup, if nothing else, right there. But Yeah, the Olympia game, that Olympia Roxana game is going to be, pretty interesting again. Can't say I know much about Roxana, all other than the fact that they're having, I think, their best year in school history, undefeated at 11-0. I do think, I think Olympia wins that game because they've been so tested. You mentioned that conference that they play in. We talked about Monroe at Forsyth earlier. I mean, there are, I have to count, there are 3 teams from the Sangamo Conference that are still alive in the quarterfinals, which is, quite the feat. Yeah, Monroe Forsyth, who's obviously a state contender. You have Olympia, who I think, is, I think can win this weekend, move on to the semifinals. Then you also, down in Class 2, you have Athens as well, who I think is probably the favorite right now in the Class 2A South bracket. Again, we're kind of really pushing, get further away from Peoria, but they play those teams during the regular season. Even though Olympia's 7-2, the losses are to very good teams. They've been tested more than Roxana has. And as you'll probably all see in my CSM pick 'em on CSM overtime, I'm really high on teams that have been tested throughout the season and everything. I think a team that is maybe 8-3 but has been tested is a lot better than a team that's 11-0 and but just cupcaking their way through the entire season and everything. So I think that's certainly a reason to feel confident in the Spartans this week.
Yeah, the Spartans, give you a lot of confidence. In our season pick 'em, I actually did pick Roxana. And mind you, when I pick a lot of these games, they're usually a flip of a coin unless they're a little more obvious. You got a heavy favorite or something. But these get really, really tough to call. The Shells are on the road, so that does kind of weigh on your mind a little bit about home field advantage. However, while Olympia has been tested, Roxana's also faced their fair share of tests. Also, they beat Breeze Central pretty well, 52-28. That was a team 9-2. So they were, I believe they were knocked out of the playoffs here at some point, but they've had their fair share of tests. They've played a few playoff teams. I lied. Breeze Central is taking on Rochester, who has
Oh,
been
I'll be
a
a big one.
juggernaut of epic proportions. So, they've obviously earned their way through here, and Roxana's, faced a few teams. A lot of the teams are well out of our coverage area, far away from Central Illinois, but they've had pretty big margins of victory, just kind of looking down their schedule. And again, I can't say I know a ton about their team, but all I know is that just looking at this matchup, it's going to be close. Olympia having home field advantage, that's going to be really exciting. So if you're up there and you're a Spartans fan, I think that it's going to be a fun Saturday for everybody to head out to the football field. And if you're a Spartans fan, you'd want to see a victory. If Roxana's traveling, they're going to hope for an upset. So that's going to be a really fun Saturday, in rural Illinois.
Certainly, Olympia, large school district, covers a lot of ground. Back-to-back quarterfinals for the first time in school history. Eric Lyons, really just a tremendous guy. I got to talk to. He was the first coach I talked to in the preseason. Really fun getting to meet him and everything. And yeah, again, Spartans having a great year. It's certainly a team you should keep an eye on as well. But moving on, to the bigger schools, I'm sure more of our listeners are maybe, possibly wonder about Washington Normal Community. Washington 21-0 win over Crete Moni last week. That was a huge win for them, considering Crete Moni had beat Washington twice in the last 5 years in the playoffs. So almost kind of a pseudo rivalry between those teams. They face each other so much, two classic 6A powers, and game was pretty ugly at first. Looked like I was watching Big Ten West football in the first half. It was just punt Mageddon. But Washington broke through in the second half. Cam McQuarrie had 2 touchdowns, and I mean, just the defense. I mean, that was one of their best performances to date, which almost sounds crazy to say because they just keep getting better.
Pitch a shutout in the playoffs, and that's going to go down as an all-timer right there. I mean, not to mention you're playing this, as you mentioned, almost rival that you've kind of made here in the playoffs. But being able to pitch a shutout is something that not a lot of teams can do because, mind you, regardless of who your opponent is, these are playoff caliber teams. So even if it is a bit of a runaway, you'd fully expect the team to be able to push across 1 touchdown. So, more power to Washington for being able to just really stiffen up defensively there. Cremoni had their opportunities and things, but Washington just, even when they bent a little bit, they never broke and they were able to just push a couple touchdowns. All it takes is winning by 1 point. Of course, you can't really just get only 1 point touchdown, but if you win by just one touchdown, that's good enough to get the win. But yeah, Washington, heading into face Glenwood this week. Glenwood's, I know, a team we've actually kind of talked about a little bit, not really again in the coverage area, but they've kind of been around the areas. I believe they faced some local teams. They played Danville earlier this year. They played Decatur, MacArthur, so reason Bloomington. So we've mentioned them a couple of times. They're kind of an interesting school because they stand at 8-3, and while they've had a couple of times where they've lost, they probably shouldn't have felt like they lost. You looked at the teams they lost to. They lost by a touchdown to Sacred Heart Griffin, lost by 2 points to MacArthur. So they've had some relatively close games. I think Washington pulls it out, but I think Glenwood's going to give them a test, John.
Yeah, certainly. And Glenwood, I just an absolutely unreal football game last week against Oakland Richards. I was following along. I was getting Twitter updates. I was following Ryan Mahan from the Springfield State Journal Register. As we're coming down the stretch in Washington, figure out who they're gonna play next week. Are they gonna be on the road against Glenwood? Are they gonna host Oakland Richards? And Glenwood was ahead in a little bit for that one. Then Oakland Richards came back and scored. Then Glenwood scored with a minute 13 left, like a minute or two after Oakland Richards had scored. Then after Glenwood scored with a minute 13, then Richards goes down and scores another touchdown with 36 seconds left to put them ahead by 3. Then Glenwood kicks a field goal as time expires in regulation. They go to overtime. Glenwood gets the stop on a 2-point conversion after they had gotten the touchdown, really similar to the normal Community Bradley Bourbonnais game, which we'll touch on in a second. But just one absolute thriller game. It's 52-51, the final score. It's scouting Glenwood a little bit. It's a team that is really hitting the stride offensively the last couple of weeks. Just looking at it right now, they put up 63 against Bloomington in the first round. 52 against Oakland Richards last week. I think week 9 of the regular season they had like 45. So really a lot of playmakers on offense for them. Player to watch is going to be Colton. I hope I'm saying his name right. Nodler or Nedler. I believe it may be Nedler. Sophomore quarterback for the Titans, and he threw I'm pulling it up right now, 385 yards and 5 touchdowns last week. So it's gonna be really interesting to see the air heavy attack of Glenwood versus Washington's run heavy attack. Again, we mentioned running will probably get you far in the playoffs. It's kind of like defense. Defense will take you far, especially in those big games and everything. But really excited to see what the outcome of that game will be. I'm not saying this just because we're based in PR. I do think Washington is probably slightly favored in that game, even though they're on the road a little bit. Thankfully, they get a shorter road trip, not too far. It's an hour 15 minutes south, but it's just it just comes out of their defense. It really does. You shut out Crete Monier, it's like, well, what more can you do? You held Kankakee to 7 points. That's one of the best offenses in the state as well. And Glenwood, certainly there's offenses right up there as well, but you can't really trust any offense against this Washington defense. And last week, you got Jace Harlan in a massive game, 8 tackles and 2 sacks. Noah Bell had an interception. You talk about one of the most havoc-wreaking D tackles in the area. I think Noah Bell has got to be number one. He's forced fumbles, he's recovered fumbles, he's had 2 big interceptions this year. And when you put him and Robert Martin, Eric Doherty in the middle, in between Carter Prina and Garrett Cox, who also both had really big games, had multiple sacks last week. It's just unstoppable. So I think Glenwood's rushing attack could be in for a little bit of a long afternoon. We'll see how they respond. I'm really excited to see what Washington's secondary will be like, because they're obviously going to get tested a lot. So I got to get my eyes on guys like Grayson Barth, Tyler Brown, and then Cam McQuarrie also in the secondary as well, alongside Mason Burke.
Yeah, and we can break it down all we want. I think the thing that, and I hate to get ahead of myself here, but and this always confuses me for the record with the brackets about who gets home games and when it comes to this stage of the playoffs. But if my math is correct, I think Washington is a winner this week against Glenwood. They're guaranteed to have a home game. So yeah, give me the thumbs up there. With Kankakee playing their 3rd straight home game of the playoffs, and East St. Louis having already played 2, Washington having played 2. If they're able to get past this round, which mind you got to take one day at a time. they would have a marquee matchup against either East St. Louis or Kankakee.
Oh boy.
You know, most
Oh boy.
yeah, most likely, that one's going to be on the 18th, a Saturday, and I'm sure it'll be an afternoon game. But holy cow, that'll be some must see football. And I mean, it doesn't really get any better than that, John. I mean, to be completely honest, I think, you kind of look at these bottom four teams in the bracket as we kind of look at it as a whole. Kankakee, St. Louis, Washington, Glenwood. Yeah, I really think Kankakee, St. Louis, really any of these teams, the bottom four, I think have all a shot to go to the state finals, whereas you look at the top half of the bracket, really Lake Zurich is the main one that stands out to me. They're maybe Belvedere North if they can get past Lake
Geneva
Zurich.
is
But
also very good too.
yeah, Geneva's good. They're definitely underrated, but I feel like there's just such a larger, competition there amongst those bottom four teams in the bracket that if you're able to get past this and you're the one team that makes it out of this four-way team fight, you're going to be more than battle tested come state championship time. So whoever it ends up being, they're going to be tested, and I think they have a really good shot at winning, and hoisting a state trophy. But there's a couple weeks to go before we get there. Do not want to get ahead of myself whatsoever. And as you mentioned, Washington's going to have some things going. They're going to need to keep the running game on, but hey, defense can win you championships. And, maybe Daryl Crouch is trying to employ that a little extra here as he winds down his career, and he'd like to keep it going for a couple more games.
Certainly. And another thing to keep an eye on the ground game for Washington wise is I believe Cam McQuarrie came out of the game. Obviously, Washington was ahead by a couple scores at that point, so didn't need to have him in the game, but he did leave last week's game with a groin injury. So worth monitoring. Haven't been able to talk to Daryl Crouch yet, but I know it'll be interesting to see if he'll be healthy again. They've been running him pretty hard this year, but again, Cam McQuarrie is a really tough guy at switch their offense. If they don't have Cam McQuarrie, I'd look to I think Hunter Reed, their backup running back, is going to get a lot of carries. He's really impressed me in the playoffs. Had good games last 2 weeks. Obviously, and their quarterback Tyler Humphrey as well. I think it would carry the ball a lot more. Jace Harlan, their fullback, I think could be a candidate for more.
I'm a big proponent of Jace Harlan. He plays an important role. I think we need to give more love to the fullbacks out there.
Yes.
He's responsible for a lot of those yards McQuarrie has gotten, and probably a few touchdowns as well. He's maybe a little better at blocking than running the ball, but he can run the ball too. Give it to him, and he's a little more of an undersized fullback, but he's got a lot of tenacity, and he'll get after it there too. So you mentioned you want your staff 100%, but even if McQuarrie, takes a few less touches than normal, I think they still have enough depth to get them through this week. And I think that the play here is go in there, get your win. You can win by 1 point. It could be an ugly win. Get your win and lick your wounds going into what that next week would be. So Washington just going to need to try to find a way to win here on the road. However it might be, you just got to survive and advance at this point.
Yeah, no matter what, if Washington wins, I think a lot of high school football fans in Illinois would be licking their chops at what next week could bring them back to the field, because you either get a rematch against Kankakee, which would just be absolutely sublime, or you get the absolute machine that is East St. Louis making a trip up to Washington, which I mean that would be insane. You got D1 talent all over the place on both sides of the ball, especially on offense. Matched up against Washington's defense, who maybe they don't have like the big D1 talent, big name guys and everything, but I'd love to see how they would match up against the Flyers as well. So again, a big game. Washington does have to get past the Glenwood. Titans will give them a test. They're no pushover by any means. But lots to look forward to with the Panthers. And then, moving on to Class 7A normal community, they sweated through a big 31-30 win over Bradley Bourbonnais last week. Big win in overtime. I believe Bradley Bourbonnais, I think they tied it late. And then Tommy Davis got the winning touchdown for normal community. He's a candidate for our CSM Fall Athletes of the Week on clutchsportsl.com. So head on over, check that out. Vote for your favorite athlete before voting closes at 5 p.m. Friday. But big win for the Ironmen. They lost almost the exact same way that Bradley Bourbonnais did this year. That's almost exactly how they lost to Pekin last year. So, again, had to sweat through that one. But I do think community, I think, has a pretty decent shot, more decent than people would think, to go on the road and beat Glen Bard East this week.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look at that last week and say, oh boy, are they not, are they not going to be able to pull it out? Are they going to, slow down here in the playoffs? But, I think that, you go in that first week, you're playing the 32nd seed Argo. You win pretty handedly, not to say that they, I'm sure the whole mindset all week was, just, keep pounding, keep working. But I think, you may come out a little bit flat coming off a game like that versus maybe you do play a thriller in the first game of the playoffs. You're more on high alert. So now I think that normal community is on high alert. Like I said, sometimes you just got to be able to survive in advance. Sometimes you just have to get the ugly win out of the way on the road to potentially a state chip. And Glenbard East is the 9 seed. They're 10-1. They've obviously faced some really good competition throughout the season. Again, all up in the Chicagoland area. But being able to take on normal community this week is gonna be thrilling for sure. And I just think, as we mentioned earlier, they're so deep. There's just so many facets of the Ironman that I like. With knee camp. Tommy Davis, of course, gets a lot of love, but I think they also have a pretty stifling defense, especially considering the competition they're going up against with lots of offensive weapons, with a lot of offensive depth. So a lot of credit to the Ironman defense. I think that they can put a little pressure on the run game and the pass game of Glenbard East, maybe pick up a couple sacks, a couple tackles for loss, may put the Ironman in a good position to potentially win this game and move on, which, like I said, no easy games in the playoffs, but they may have a little more of a favorable route to Illinois State University for the state championship if they can get past this week.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm looking at Glenbard East again. Scouting them a little bit. They haven't given up more than 17 points all season long, which is quite impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at their conference that they play in. They play in the Upstate 8 conference. And there's certainly some good teams in there, although I do think it's far from the best conference in suburban Chicago. Glenbard East, they're obviously the only team still remaining in the playoffs, but other top teams in their conference were South Elgin, who I believe is either a 7A or 8A. I think they're an 8A school. And then Glenbard South. Glenbard South had a really good season, although I believe they're a class 5A school. So anytime you have a 5A matchup against a 7A like Glenbard East, obviously you expect Glenbard East to win, which they did. Their only loss right now is to South Elgin by 3 points back in week 2. And South Elgin obviously is a decent team and everything. I can't not gonna act like I know a ton about them because I don't. Um,
They
but
lost, actually, so South Elgin's out.
yeah, South Elgin is out. South Elgin was the team again. Record is always good, but I feel like when the rubber hits the road, I feel like they're don't really quite stack up with that upper echelon of teams in suburban Chicago. I was a AP poll voter for IHSA this past year, and I consistently ranked them, but maybe not as high as their record would indicate, just because of they didn't play as strong of a schedule. And you look at Glenbard East, I mean, they have some decent wins, but these are the records of the teams they beat: 3-6, 5-5, 6-4, 2-7, 1-8, 0-9. They did beat Glenbard South, who's 9-2, but again a 5A school. And then 4-5, and then they beat Harlem 24-0. Harlem 6-4, and they beat Addison Trail last week who's 7-4. They beat Addison Trail 28-13. And again, nothing against Addison Trail or Harlem. I don't think either one of those teams are super strong. So I haven't really seen a ton from Glenbard East that I absolutely love that make me think that, hey, normal community is in some real danger. Again, obviously I know it's suburban Chicago, and again, I'm no expert on that area, but I do think that for all the people out there that say, oh, normal community doesn't play anybody, and I think there's people from a certain area of the state that would say that, and I mean, you can make that case. Obviously I think there's just more stronger teams in the Chicago areas by virtue of this volume. But I think, just because there's more good teams doesn't mean that you're always playing them and everything.
No, and you mentioned that. I mean, the Big 12 conference is no pushover. I think that people take it for downstate. People say, okay, there's Chicago, and then everything below Chicago is Southern Illinois. And
We may as well be in St. Louis for all
yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
as a
it's
thing.
it needs to just be our own state at this point. But it's really just one of those things. I think people discount what Big 12 play really is, and I think that that's, football that's just very competitive because of how close those teams are, the rivalries and things. So it takes to another level. And the fact the community was consistently and just absolutely hammering opponents like, rival Normal West, Peoria High. I mean, these are really, really good teams in 5 and 6A, so not that far off. I think that should tell you all you need to know. Again, they sweated it out last week. I think they're going to be better going into this week, and I think that they, have a good route to go to the state championship. It'd be a lot of people will be there. It's close to home, and I think that'd be exciting. But overall, closing thoughts, I think it's going to be a good week for the 4 remaining teams, and there's still a few other teams that are not in our coverage area that I'm excited to watch as well. But it's that time of year, and I'll get into Illinois State University for obviously changing venues, but it's going to be exciting time. And even though basketball's coming up, I got to finish off football season because we've been here for a while, and got to see it to a head. So excited to see where it goes, John.
Yeah, I certainly am as well. It's going to be another great week. Again, obviously not as many games, but they become more important at this point of the season. And again, lots of still local teams alive. And I'm going to end up by saying this. I think at least 2 of the 4 teams in our coverage area win this week, if not more. I do like it. I do like a lot of local teams' chances this week, Gavin. I don't know about you. I don't know if you want to throw any bold predictions out there, but that's mine if I have one.
Boy, I think that you're right. At least 2 is a good number. I'm going to say, I'm going to give a bold prediction for Community, even though I think people might think this is going to be a close game. I think Community wins this game pretty comfortably. I'm not going to say they're going to win it like 52-0 or something like that, but I think that they can go in and,
Oh
they,
my.
no, absolutely not. But, I think that they could definitely go in and win by 2 or 3 touchdowns and, not sweat it out this week. That's my bold prediction is I think a lot of people would be expecting a close game. If you're from Chicago area or Glenbard, you might be thinking Normal Community loses. I'm going to say Community is going to win pretty comfortably, and they're going to, be able to have a nice bus ride home, perhaps pick up some Lou Malnati's on their way, and they'll head right into the semifinal.
Oh, certainly. Well, if grab some Lou Malnati's, even though I don't think we have any here around Central Illinois, but
Are they not going to Glenbard?
no, they are going to Glenbard, Normal
Okay,
Community.
good. I want to make sure.
I'm addressing the fans, the people watching this, and I say if you are happening here in Chicago, grab some Lou Malnati's and or whatever your favorite snack is, and tune in. Cliff Sports Media is covering free live broadcasts of Washington and Glenwood on Saturday at 2 p.m. It should be a fun time. Making the road trip. Always fun when we get to take the show on the road. Don't get to do it too terribly often, but the playoffs certainly kind of have to, and it should be a really fun game. Hope you all tune in Saturday at 2 p.m. on ciproud.com. So that about wraps things up for this episode of the In the Clutch podcast. It's a real fun time alongside Gavin Russell. I'm Jonathan Michael saying so long. I'll talk to you on Saturday for some IHSA playoff football.